Wake up with a smile, and then in a while, come to lunch with the ladies. Lunch with the ladies. Lunch with the ladies. Lunch with the ladies.
To Lunch with the Ladies. Thank you so much for joining us. Before I start today's show, I want to start on a very happy note. I want to give a shout out to our co-host, Messalina, on the birth of her son, Walter. Messalina, welcome to motherhood.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here. For those watching, Messalina gave birth less than 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago today.
2 weeks ago today, and she is here.
Fabulous.
Yes, a round of applause. And it is fitting that for this show, we started off with something happy, because having a baby is a reminder of hope in life. Today's show is very special, serious, and difficult. It's the kind of show that I like to do because I hope that, and all of our co-hosts like to do, because we hope it will help someone watching. We're here to talk about 9/11, not to get into the background of it, but as a remembrance and tribute to those that we lost, and to give us some idea on how to cope with grief. The attacks on 9/11 killed 2,977 people. In 1993, the attack on the World Trade Center killed 6. We remember the date of 9/11 every year with memorials throughout the country, and we especially remember it on the 20th anniversary. The reason we're doing this show is to remember those that we lost, and also to talk about grief. We've all suffered grief in our lives. We also love people that are going through grief. And it just seems to me, maybe because I've been on this planet for many decades, I seem to have more funerals that I go to, and I seem to be viewing more tragedies on the news. But I've also always wondered how to help someone that's grieving. To that end, we are honored to have family therapist Monica McNamara to join us. Monica McNamara is a family therapist in private practice in Boston, Massachusetts. She is the director of curriculum for Project Common Bond, a program of today's children. They work with young people around the world who have experienced a loss due to terrorism, violent extremism, or military conflict. Monica also runs retreats for women who have lost a child or a spouse due to military conflict. Now, when I was putting this show together, I did not know what I would find. I knew my memory of 9/11 and that of one of the other hosts, but I did not know about the other 2 co-hosts. My question to start off the show today is going to be, what do you remember about 9/11? What's your memory? And when I was putting the show together, I was very surprised to hear that we all shared a common bond. All 4 of us had family members that had worked at the Trade Center or in a building right next to it. Now, 3 of us were very lucky. 1 of us was not. Today, we're going to hear everyone's story and remember the spouse of one of our co-hosts. So we're going to start today with you, Beth. Tell us what you remember about 9/11.
I remember it was an absolutely beautiful fall day. I was at work. I was on my way to a meeting, and I got a call from my husband, who worked in the World Financial Center right next door. And he said, a plane hit the World Trade Center. I'm on my way home. And I thought that was odd, because small planes in the past had clipped the antennas of the World Trade Centers, and it barely made headline news. And remember, this was before we had smartphones. We didn't have a computer and news streaming at the time. I hung up. I thought it was odd. Phone rings again. It's my youngest sister. She was a resident, chief resident at St. Vincent's in Lower Manhattan. And she was very quick. And she said, call mommy, tell her I'm fine, and tell her not to call here. Still didn't know what was happening. I get up to go to my meeting, and my boss comes running in. She sits me down. She tells me what happened. My husband, very fortunately, he and his coworkers happened to see the planes hit. They were told to stay inside. They said, no, there's flames. We have to get out. It could spread. So they got out right away. And somehow by hopping on the last ferry and hitchhiking home, they made it back. So it was surreal. I couldn't even understand what had happened.
It was surreal. And that was something that all four of us live in the tri-state area. That was one of the big things, was getting home. People were hitchhiking, walking across bridges. It's incredible that he was able to get on a ferry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Beth. Messalina, tell us about your story.
So, well, I was 4 when it happened, but I definitely remember it all. I was sat in the living room watching Clifford the Big Red Dog, as I did every morning. And my mom came like running down the stairs. I'd never seen her in such a state, streaming tears on the phone. And I was like, that's really weird. And what had happened was my family in England had seen the news before she'd woken up. And my aunt had called my mom because my dad worked in the Twin Towers and his office was on the 102nd floor. So everyone in England thought my dad was dead. And so my mom was obviously in a very traumatized state. She grabbed the remote out of my hand and changed the news. And I was like, I want to watch Clifford. And I remember watching the news. I remember seeing it, and I didn't understand what was going on because I was like too young to comprehend. And eventually my mom sat me down and explained. And I'd been in with my dad the week before in the office and with all his colleagues and everything. So I knew them. I sat on their laps and played Blue's Clues on their computers. And so it was just very much like, I guess the first time I had really experienced any kind of sense of loss or understanding that people aren't there anymore. And my dad happened to be on a business trip in Chicago, a last minute one. And the irony was his job, he'd taken this new one because my mom didn't want him doing business trips all the time. So she'd been really annoyed with him and like, why did you say yes to this trip? I want you at home. Ironic. And it was for McDonald's, and we're so grateful to them because they hired a taxi, and the taxi driver drove 14 hours straight to get him home. And so Dad was home before people from the city got home. And so we've never complained about a business trip again.
We've heard a lot of those stories, where they should have been there in the building and they weren't. So you're very fortunate. My story is, my husband worked at 7 World Trade Center for 20 years. He was there for the 1993 bombing. In fact, he was in the elevator and he heard it shake. They went down, there was kind of pandemonium, but they had no idea really what was going on. And they said people can go back in the building and get their belongings. So my husband did. He just went back and got his keys. Flash forward to maybe 2 months before 9/11. His company that was located in 7 World Trade Center decided, we're packing up and moving across the river to a brand new skyscraper in Jersey City. So on 9/11, and I will tell you, what I heard was, people wanted to work in New York City. They were not happy that they were moving to Jersey. And that day they watched in real time, because the building is right across the Hudson. They watched in real time as the planes hit the towers. So again, very fortunate. I did field a lot of phone calls because people didn't know that my husband, his company had relocated. But, it wasn't just the 2 towers that went down that day. 7 World Trade Center also just collapsed at the end of the day. So very fortunate here also. Next, we're going to hear from Ileana.
On that day, as I was exiting the Lincoln Tunnel on the New York side, the show that I was listening to on the radio got interrupted by this message about a plane hitting the World Trade Center. And like Beth, I thought the same thing. A small, private plane, clipped the antenna or clipped, part of the building. It was very unclear what was going on, because back then, we have to remember, 20 years ago, we didn't have the technology that we have today. So things weren't given to us as rapidly as they are today. So I got out of the Lincoln Tunnel, parked the car in the garage as I usually do, and there was a lot of buzz in the garage with people that were coming in and out, plus the guy who takes care of the cars, about, what had happened, but we didn't know. But I was calling my husband because I knew he had a meeting in the building that day. He didn't work in the building. He worked at the Mercantile Exchange. In 93, he did work in the building, so he was there for 93. The company moved out of the building. They did their own building on the other side of the financial center on the water. And so I kept trying him, but I couldn't get through. And it dawned on me, I didn't panic because it dawned on me, well, maybe there's something going on because of the antenna. There's a big antenna on that, on the tower. So I didn't think that much of it. I just kept trying as I was walking to my office. When I get to 6th Avenue and I look down the street, that's when I got the first view, because I'm thinking the plane clipped it. That's when I see this gaping hole, and now I'm getting more nervous, and I just keep calling him. Then now I am getting through, but he's not picking up, but I'm leaving a message. I get to my office. My assistant is crying because her boyfriend is with my husband. He's my husband's clerk. But I assured her, I said, he's not there. He's not in the meeting because only the brokers were in the meeting, not the clerks. I said, but you know what? Even if they were, they're out of the building. The meeting would have been done by now because they've got to be back on the floor. Mm-hmm. Well, little did I know, the meeting ran late, so they were still there. So when I get to my office, I tell the receptionist, if my husband calls, put him through right away. So, I'm getting phone calls from all kinds of people, and I'm calling the wives that I know who might have some information because our husbands work together. And I get through to one, she doesn't have any information either. And then there's, and this goes on for about 40 minutes. Mm. Then the receptionist makes an announcement that my husband's on the phone. So the whole office now is like this breath of, of relief. And my boss is pacing in front of my desk back and forth from a distance with a smile on his face, but he doesn't know what's going on the other side of the phone. He's thinking her husband called, everything's fine. My husband's calling to tell me that he's trapped on the 92nd floor of Tower 1 with his buddies. I ask him who he's with. He tells me. He was very calm, but very stern and very serious, but calm. And even I heard a woman crying, but everybody else I could hear, one guy was saying, let's just knock down this goddamn wall. And he was starting to tell me different things. And he said, take care of Caitlin. And I was like, no, you guys are coming home tonight. And he said, Ileana, you don't understand. There are people jumping from the floors above us. And even today, I think about that and I say, my God, these people are not jumping to save themselves. They're jumping to their deaths. So how bad could it be that this is what they've chosen to do? And I just kept saying, no, you guys are tenacious. You guys are going to get out of there. And again, I hear the guy, yeah, we're going to knock down this goddamn wall. Mm. And, he said, I love you. Take care of Caitlin. And then he said, I got to get down on the floor. He did say, if we get out of here, it'll be a miracle. Mm-hmm. And for years, I thought, I wish that I had that message from him like other wives and other significant others have, because they could play it back and they hear their voice. But then I think about it and I say, no, it's good that he got through to me because he got to talk to me. He got to hear my voice. Yeah. And he got to say goodbye to a real person, not left a message on my machine. Yeah. So I'm so blessed that that's the way it went down, and so blessed for so many reasons. We're one of the lucky ones that they found his body mostly intact about 3 months later, which is shocking. And it's shocking that then they found the rest of him 3 years later. Mm. So the amount, when you think about the kind of work that these people have done to bring closure to families, it's a miracle. Mm-hmm. It's a miracle that these people have worked the way they've worked. Yeah.
I don't know what to say. So I think I'm going to hand it over to Monica now. If you could just talk to us. You're familiar with what Ileana is going through. Can you shed some light on what her feelings were? Ileana, please feel free to interject, but can you tell us, what the grieving process is like after a tragedy like this, and how we can help someone?
Mm-hmm. Well, Ileana, thank you for sharing that story. And I know that is a profound act, actually, to be able to share that with other people. So I appreciate it. You mentioned that they found your husband's remains first 3 months, and then you said 3 years later.
Yeah.
And I just want to start with that, you know, that extended period of time where people are waiting for a closure, waiting to have and receive their loved one. And I think that is very much a hallmark of what families went through with after 9/11. And I work with young people as well as some adults who lost spouses, and they speak about that time as being just kind of a torturous time where you're not really here and you're not there yet. You're just in that space of suspension. So I can only imagine what that was like for you. I think given the public nature of 9/11, you have a very private, intimate event, a loss of your husband, right? But it's writ large and it's in the news every day and the scenes are being replayed. And there's a way that that can be so traumatizing for adults and children. The media has their own way of telling the story, and it might not in any way fit with yours. And I think given that it's such a public event, other people feel emboldened to say, well, what happened? Tell me what happened, you know, and that is not something that you should have to be, you know, subjected to, or your family. I want to just talk for a minute about the young people that I work with often feel like they're a singular person in a large group at school. They're the only ones that had this loss. They feel kind of separated from the herd, you know, that other people don't quite know what this is like, or that they're getting a lot of unwanted attention. When 9/11 comes around each year and school is on, young people feel like they're the ones that have to represent the entire population of people who have experienced loss in 9/11. And I think all of that is to say that there's kind of an overexposure, and it doesn't necessarily allow you the peace and privacy to process the multitude of feelings that are occurring. And that vulnerability that's there. And again, the fact that it's so public. And if I shift for a second to the experience with the losses from COVID, there's a similar phenomenon in that, you know, both with 9/11 and with people, normally healthy people who become sick. 9/11, your husband went to work that day. It was a normal day. You kind of had a sense of, well, he'll come home and we'll do dinner or whatever. These unimaginable events that are so hard to comprehend really make the sort of shock and trauma that much greater. There's no anticipation. And when I use the word trauma, I want to just reference that idea that, you know, with trauma, the worst thing that could possibly happen has happened. And you lose that kind of shell of safety that we all need to function on a day-to-day basis. It's punctured. And there is that feeling that there isn't safety. The brain processes it by creating a kind of hypervigilance. We all know the expression, it's fight, flight, or freeze. And I think those concepts really fit in with the stages of grieving that happen. But I think important to just note that all the chemicals that are coursing through your system as a result of this can keep you very fixed on the event in a way that doesn't promote or permit healing. And again, with COVID, I think so many families feel as though their loved one died, and if it happened during quarantine, then they weren't able to be there with them through that process, nor could they memorialize them in a way that they would have wanted to. And an underlying feeling of it could have been prevented. You know, if we had been better informed, if we had had the wherewithal, we could have maybe taken steps to have greater prevention and not have so many people exposed. So I think that public nature of it. And Ileana, I defer to you, what that was like for you.
Yeah, it's interesting when you bring that up about it being so public, because that is exactly it. It is so different. If my husband had died of natural causes or illness, you know, no one's going to remember 20 years later. But when it's something like this, the whole world remembers. I mean, people reached out to me who I didn't know, from other countries, leaders from other countries. I got letters, I got emails. Yeah, I was inundated. I was inundated with things. And even now, with this 20th anniversary, there were many calls about doing interviews, and I only said yes to 2 of them because they came through Tuesday's Children, which is an organization that we, the 9/11 community, leaned on.
Yeah.
They were created right after 9/11 for the kids, and it was just a blessing, this group. And because they reached out to me, I said, yeah, for them, I'll do this. And so I did 2 for them. But it gets to a point where, you know, even this anniversary, I'm not even sure if I'm going down.
Right.
I've gone down every year. And last year, obviously, with the pandemic, we didn't. But I just don't think I can do it. I did it every year because I just felt, how can I not be there? This brings me closer to him. This is where he last was. But now I thought it would be easier, but it's not.
You know, I think it's a sign of health. I think to be able to set limits and say, I can or I can't do this. I want to or I don't want to do this. I think the expectations that are heaped on, you're recognized as a 9/11 widow. Oh my God, so many projections on what you should feel, what you should do. And it's really about your kind of centering yourself in this and thinking about what you most feel able to do. So I think that is a healthy decision.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I have a question for both of you, Ileana and Monica. So every loss is a tragedy. It's worse when it's a public tragedy or something that people feel can be preventable. But Ileana, what is it that helped you? And Monica, what is it that will help people grieve?
You know, so many people asked me that in the first few years. How are you getting through this? How are you doing this? How are you surviving this? And I was at a loss. I was like, I'm just on autopilot. I don't know. I have a 4-year-old that I need to take care of. I don't know. I don't know how I'm doing it, but I'm doing it. I had a team I had to manage at work. But it was a few years later, I realized what it was. It's the power of love. And when I say love, I don't mean the love of my husband or my family or my friends, because those are a given. That is a given forever. I'm talking about the love of people you don't know who reach out. It is so unbelievably powerful with all the evil that we have and all the negativity in this world. The good is so incredibly powerful. And we need to hang on to that, and we need to share it, and we need to give it back, because it's magic.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, people say, oh, the fountain of youth, if I just had the drug. Well, here's a drug.
Right.
And it is about love and about kindness and about watching out for each other, regardless of, you know, you don't like your neighbor because they're this religion or that religion, or because they're this background or color. Forget all that. It's the power of love and camaraderie and being there for each other. And that's what got me through. Of course, the love of my family too, but this other thing, it was so powerful to know that people were coming together. And I have a million examples of that power it was a few weeks after I had to go to the bank. I had gotten this check for some minimal amount, $40 or something. And it was from the car lease that my husband had, that we had returned the car. Now we bought a different car, and they sent us this check. But it was made out to him. And I went to the bank to deposit it. And the teller said, "Oh, well, I'm sorry, Mr. McGinnis has to sign this." And I just started to cry. I couldn't say anything.
Yeah.
And she took her sign and she put closed, and she came around and she sat with me on the couch. And we just cried together. And this woman knew nothing about me. She didn't know what the circumstances were, but she guessed it. Because we were so hypersensitive, all New Yorkers, the whole country, the whole world was, but especially New Yorkers. And that was what she did. And I can't tell you, there are countless stories like that. And it's unbelievable. It's so beautiful.
I'm so glad you framed it that way, because again, when we're dealing with what terrorism wrought, the feeling is the world is a terrible place and it's all bad. And to be able to say, no, it isn't, that love is there, and it shows up in, on steroids when something like this happens. I was going to say, just the few little things, the people that reached out to you, that just showed their love to you. Sometimes I think we don't know how to respond to somebody who's grieving, who's had a loss. Showing up is, as you mentioned, just critical. Being able to listen and not come in with an assumption about what the other person's going through, but being present in that way, to just receive and listen and witness in a loving way. My experience is that when you can get with other people who have been through it, there's a way that talking through your experiences, your shared experiences, does a number of things. It breaks down that isolation. You're not alone. You're not the only person who had this. It gives you ideas about maybe somebody's a little further along, or maybe somebody came up with a good coping mechanism. And it gives you a little bit more to go on. And I think often when you're in that role, you're giving somebody else something that they're needing very much. They need to hear just that thought about love as the guiding force. And that can make all the difference in how their grieving happens. And then I think there are those things of like, don't ask, what can I do? But do something, bring some food, or drive somebody somewhere, or something that just takes some of the burden of daily living when you're in crisis off the table.
So Monica, what you're saying is it's support after a public tragedy. Everyone's heard of it, you get a lot of it, but even if you're going through a loss from someone that died of cancer, going to a support group for people other people that lost through cancer, that those kind of support groups really help, whether it's the world supporting you or just a few people.
Yes, and just to give an example, our program at Tuesday's Children, Project Common Bond, brings together young people, and they will just say, I can't really talk about my experience with the kids that in my community or in my school or whatever. And we're bringing together US and international young people who have had a loss due to terrorism. When they start to speak, there's such an immediate recognition and a relief, like, okay, I don't have to hold this in that same way. It's got a healing quality to it.
And the name of it is so perfect, Common Bond, because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Think about to put it in a really simple thing, think about when you're in a foreign country and everyone around you is from that country or other countries. And then you run into a fellow American. Isn't there this connection? It doesn't matter. They could be from Nebraska and you're from the South, or Texas and you're from New York. It doesn't matter. There's this common bond.
Yeah.
And that's what it is in these groups, Tuesday's Children, the program Common Bond.
Yeah.
And just even getting together with other people that are 9/11 families. There's that common bond that's so hard for other people to understand.
Exactly.
Even now, 20 years later, it's so hard for other people to understand, even though they've suffered a loss. It's a very different kind of loss.
That's right. Well, I was just going to add on to what you were saying, Ilana, that when we meet at Project Common Bond and young people of all different backgrounds are together in a group and they're sharing their experience, there isn't necessarily a shared language. And sometimes I'll just say to one of the young people who don't speak English, tell us in your own language. We'll understand it. And it is remarkable. You could hear a pin drop because there's such rapt attention, and they get each other. They feel the sentiment and the pain and the kind of courage that comes through. So it's a beautiful quality that we humans have and don't necessarily always exercise.
Especially now with not communicating face to face and over
Yes.
devices. Beth,
Absolutely.
do you have any questions?
Yes, Monica, and thank you, because you said earlier really rang true. Just don't ask what you can do, just do something.
Right.
What are some examples, and also what can you say, or can you say nothing? Because what is there to say?
Mm-hmm. And Ileana, I again ask you what comes through to you. I'm going to shift it a little bit if I can answer the opposite, if I can say what I've learned not to say. You don't ever want to say things happen for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to say, I know just how you feel. You don't want to say it was God's plan. You don't want to say you should ... or isn't it time that ... And all of those things may be important thoughts that will come to fruition at some point. But when an individual is going through the grieving process, other people should just listen and not assume. I think a lot of people are fighting with their God when they've had such a traumatic loss. And so it's hard to link that a God wanted this to happen, right? And it takes away from the individual's unique experience when you say, oh, I know just what you feel. What would you add to that, Ileana?
On the flip side of what to do, some things to do, because sometimes we can't tell you what we need, but we don't know. So you mentioned it. You said things that just help lighten the load of the everyday. Can I pick your daughter up at school? Can I drop her off? Can I, let me go to the supermarket for you? Do you have dry cleaning that has to get picked up? No, we're taking the vacuum cleaner. We're going to vacuum your house. Just do it. Just do it. But I'll tell you, on that day, when the building collapsed, I lost the connection with Thomas. I went to the ladies' room. I must have gone to the ladies' room 7 times in those 40 minutes. And I came back, and that's when the building collapsed. And there was just dead silence in my office. Mm-hmm. They turned off the TV. There was dead silence. And our office was on 5th Avenue. So I opened the window, and I looked out the window. And my boss came over. He told somebody to close the window. And I just dropped to my knees. And he hugged me so hard that I could barely breathe. And I don't know to this day if I couldn't breathe because of what happened and what I saw out that window, or if it was from that hug. Right. But that hug, I'll never forget that. Mm-hmm. And I've done it for friends who have lost someone where, there isn't anything I can say. You just hold their hand and you give them that hug. And just that release of being able to cry is just... After you're done with that cry, you just feel so much better. I don't know what it is. It's just this release.
Yeah.
And it happens when someone touches you, physically touches you, hugs you, kisses your forehead, just nestles you in their arms. It's almost like you've fallen. And I literally did. And there he was. He just held me so tight.
Yeah. I mean, those human responses are so meaningful. again, just to reference COVID, none of those hugs have been available, right? So we've had to really find alternative ways to comfort and be present for each other.
And it's funny you mentioned hugs, because as soon as you said hug, when my mother died unexpectedly, I remember, I think it was a volunteer at the hospital just gave me a big hug. That's
Yeah.
what I remember, the big
Yeah.
hug.
Yeah.
Messalina, do you have a question?
Well, I think it was answered already in terms of phrases not to use around someone who's grieving. So that was really informative. Thank you.
Great. Great.
So now, well, just, to recap, Monica, if you can give our audience some takeaways. I think what I'm hearing is that, well, from Ileana, it's the power of love, and it's be there for people, and don't say a few of those, a few of the phrases that you said, but it's being there and finding your support structure. It could,
Yeah, I think the other important takeaway is everybody grieves differently, and we can't set a timetable on how somebody's going to grieve and when they will get through the experience. And on the other side, if anybody is in a prolonged sort of grieving process, and I mean, it's a year or what have you, and if that person is experiencing disturbances in sleep and appetite, or an inability to focus and motivate, or a reliance on alcohol or drugs, that is the time when you need to get help. That's serious, and it's a complex kind of grief, and it is important to ask for help in those situations. And there are people that have that as their major work. It's grief counseling. And it's not as though you're saying, you shouldn't feel those things. Those things are going to show up. It's when it's repetitive and the person is in that stuck pattern that getting help is a worthwhile endeavor.
Thank you, Monica. So speaking of help, because I know, Monica, that you have to go, and we all appreciate you being here, and please, anyone that needs help, seek a grief counselor. Monica is located in the Boston area. Monica, do you also do video grief counseling?
I mean, right now that's all I'm doing because of COVID, which is a great thing. It means it's that much more accessible. But thank you so much for including me. And Ileana, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us.
Thank you, Monica. We'll have all of Monica's information on our Facebook page. Right now, speaking of getting support and help, I'm going to have Ileana introduce our charity shout out for the day.
I am so honored to give this charity shout out. This is Terry Sears, the executive director of an amazing organization started after 9/11, Tuesday's Children. I'm not going to say anything else because I want her to tell you a little bit more about what they do, because it's amazing.
Thanks so much, Ileana, for having me, and thanks for that introduction. I came into the conversation and I'm really sorry I missed the first part of it. It sounded like it was really pretty deep and helpful and informative in terms of grief. So Tuesday's Children has been working with the 9/11 families since really the months after Tuesday, September 11th. I've been with the organization since the beginning, and it has been, it's never felt like work. I can say that. It has always been just like a labor of love to give back to the families that lost so much. I mean, I think so many of us, our country, all of us who just had anything to do with New York or even the world, I think we all lost a little piece of ourselves on that day. And how could you stand by? I am from a community of Manhasset, New York, which was heavily impacted. I fortunately am not a family member. I get asked that a lot, but knew many, many family members who lost loved ones on that day. And so, you know, our programs are essentially the same as they were when we started. It's really creating a community, a safe landing space for families who are grieving, and grieving owing to, originally it was 9/11 and the larger impact of 9/11, which included the 9/11 responders. And then after the 10-year anniversary, the Gold Star families, all those that answered the call and went to the recruitment centers. And while the 9/11 kids are growing up, which is amazing to see, the youngest are 19 and 20, and they take part in our career programs. But while they are growing older, the young people that are in our programs, such as mentoring and leadership, are the Gold Star families. So we are proud to offer our programs to another population that was so impacted by the events of Tuesday, September 11th. I have to say, though, in these last couple of weeks, I've done a number of interviews for Tuesday's Children, and the 9/11 families as a whole, I feel, because of COVID, because of the 20th anniversary, they still need our help. They really do. It's been a lot, and a lot recently for the families. And, you know, the fear of being forgotten, I think, weighs heavily on people that have had a traumatic loss. And I'm just so glad that Tuesday Children will say, you know, we'll never forget. We're always going to be there for the community. If there's secondary losses, if there's, you know, just other things that happen in people's life where they need a community of understanding, we're here for them.
That's wonderful. And the website that we go to for information would be?
www.tuesdayschildren, one word, tuesdayschildren.org.
Well, thank you, Terry. When we were speaking to Monica, the therapist, earlier, she was telling us how support and love, the two crucial elements to getting through grief.
Yeah. And we have a team, you know, I know that, Ileana, I'm sure you know some of them. That is just, we really hire to kind of be almost like that person next door that you'd want to enjoy a cup of tea with or whatever. Because, you know, I think sometimes it's simple things like getting together with others and just being able to talk to others. And of course, there's the formal programs, but I think the key is really having people that, you know, have an ear, have a heart, and have that inclination to listen and be empathetic to everything someone is going through.
Well, thank you, Terry, for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Ileana, I'd like to talk about something that I know that you've done. Can you tell me about the impetus and the project, the short film that you created?
Yeah, so it's called Twice Upon a Time, and it's the story of a 9/11 widow who, after some years, really hasn't dealt with her grief. It's not my story. It's not the story of anyone I know. It's fictional, but I wanted to do a short film that had an impact, that was a springboard for conversation about bereavement, about the fact that we really have to go through our grief, whatever that is. You can't go over it or around it or under it. You have to go through it, whatever that is for each of us. And that's really the message of this short film. It's 13 minutes long. You can see it on YouTube. If you just type Twice Upon a Time 9/11, it'll probably pop up, because I'm not the only Twice Upon a Time short. There are others. But if you do Twice Upon a Time on YouTube and then just either type my name or type 9/11, it'll probably come up, and you'll see the opening picture is probably going to be me with a little boy who plays my son in the film, and a bunch of Marines in the background with me in the photo.
It's worth watching.
Thank you.
Ileana, I just can't thank you enough for sharing the story. I mean, I've known you a few years. I didn't know that whole story, so I'm listening in just like everyone else. I appreciate you sharing the story and doing it for everyone to hear. Overall, I hope that some of what we talked about helps someone watching right now. I would like everyone to remember the people that lost their lives on 9/11 and any other tragedy, or think about anyone else in your life that has dealt with something like this. At the end of each show, I usually tell people to find joy and give joy, but in tribute to 9/11, I'm just going to tell everybody to go give some joy. Someone maybe perhaps that has lost someone, go bake them cookies, go get DoorDash to send a meal to them, go pick up the phone, send them a text or send them a card. Just spread the joy, let them know that they are not forgotten. Thanks for watching.